everybody. We got a great one, for a change. Now, for those of you who are excited about the RICO charges against Trump and the 18 other defendants in Georgia, and it is exciting. It lays out pretty much the whole plot to overturn the election in a much more complete manner than we have in the Jack Smith January 6th charges. For those of you who are hopped up about that, I have one today that is interesting, for a change, but maybe will give you a dose of reality about what is going on with the part of the electorate that doesn't listen to this podcast as often as you do, or most likely ever. Because this is a preview of Wednesday's Republican debate that will be held by Fox News, of course. And my guests are Tim Miller, a former Republican and a writer at large for Bulwark, who you may know from his frequent appearances on the MSNBC network, where he is a regular contributor, and Charlie Cook, the political analyst who has run the Cook Report for, 40 years or so, analyzing congressional races throughout the country. And both Tim and Charlie have their fingers on the pulse of Republicans and independents who lean Republican. And holy mackerel, their report is sobering. So this is also a sobering one for a change. For example, if you thought, well, I guess Nikki Haley and Tim Scott in this debate may have their eye on the second spot on the ticket, well, these guys say, oh, no. Tim Miller has been following the candidates in Iowa and elsewhere, and Nikki Haley, for example, has been criticizing Biden for not giving Ukraine enough support. Well, it turns out that the MAGA crowd hates that. They think we have no business helping Ukraine. The degree to which the nutcase right, our America Firsters, is disturbing. Tim Scott is in the same boat as Haley, way too conventional a Republican for the MAGA crowd. That's why DeSantis positioned himself the way he has, except he has some shortcomings, it seems, in the charismatic human being category. He has been rated by Republican voters last on the fun scale. Trump is the most fun. If you're a Republican, that's your idea of fun. And DeSantis is evidently less fun than Pence. Think about that. That's hard to do. If Trump makes it to the nomination, and Charlie and Tim and I discuss the narrow possibility that Trump is, say, convicted in the January 6th trial on all counts and sentenced to a total of 20 to 25 years, and his appeals are rejected, just maybe he agrees not to run for president in exchange for no jail time. And I suppose the judge in Georgia would have to agree with that, because there's no pardons in Georgia from like the feds. All the judges in the cases would have to sign off on this. Canon in Florida, I don't think she'd have any problem with this. Tim Miller makes the case that maybe Vivek Ramaswamy would be the strongest candidate with the Trump supporters, but maybe for the fact that he's Hindu. And the word is that DeSantis is going to go after Ramaswamy. And Tim Miller suggests that Ramaswamy, or Vivek, as he prefers to be referred, will wipe the floor with DeSantis. So that's going to be fun to look forward to. I don't know if you've seen DeSantis campaign. I saw a video of him in a cafe in, I think it was New Hampshire. And he goes up to this guy. He says, "What's your name?" And the guy says, "Ken." And DeSantis says, "Okay. Not nice to meet you. Not, do you hear a lot? What would you recommend? What do you do here in New Hampshire?" Nothing. Christie's in the debate. He's qualified for the debate. To be in the Fox debate, you have to agree to support the eventual nominee. And of course, Christie's whole campaign is that you can't put this crook and traitor Trump in the White House again. But he signed the agreement to support the nominee, and we'll just ignore it if Trump's the nominee, which he will be fine with, I'm sure, I guess. But that's what you do if you're Chris Christie, and if you want to get into the debate, you do that. Pence hasn't signed the agreement, but he needs to get in the debate. So my guess is, yes, I will support the nominee, even if he tried to have me killed. So there's a lot to talk about here, and from a very different perspective. Tim Miller and Charlie Cook. I think this will be a very valuable one for you to listen to, for a change. We're going to talk about this debate on Wednesday. With how many are in it now? We got Trump's not going to do it, right? Or has he said he's going to do it, or says he might do it, which means he won't, right?
Yeah, I don't expect to see him. What do you think, Tim?
I almost certainly don't expect to see him. I would think maybe in the third debate you might see him. Eventually, he'll get tired of the attention not being on him, but he's not officially announced at the time of the tape.
I guess you have 8 people that theoretically are qualified, but 3 of them have not signed the pledge, Trump, Christie, and Pence. So
Christie said he'll sign the pledge.
Christie said he'll sign the pledge. That's the pledge to support the nominee.
Yeah, Christie's basically said, I'll sign your stupid pledge if you want. What are you going to do? Send the cops after me?
That's a hell of a pledge. Take that one to the bank. Okay, and Pence hasn't said he'll sign the pledge. How could Pence? Pence isn't Christie. Christie can say, "I'll sign your stupid pledge," and I won't follow it. But that's not Pence, right?
Yeah, I've met him, but I don't really know him. But to me, I just say, you know what? I'm not going to win this nomination, so I'm going to say, I did the right thing and let the chips fall where they may, and go out with your guns blazing. But that's just not him.
Yeah, the pledge is so stupid, and we went through this in 20. I literally went through this with Jeb, where we were deciding whether or not to sign the pledge. He was deciding, and there was some breathless Politico story from the before times about some on the campaign think he should and some think he shouldn't, and all turned out to be totally irrelevant. But in the end, he did what I assume Pence will do, which is just whatever. I'll sign it and not make a big deal out of it, and then break it.
Okay, so right now, I've qualified for the debate are obviously Trump, but probably won't be there. DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Pence, Scott, Haley, and Christie. Did I miss anybody?
And Burgum.
Oh, and Burgum. Yeah, of course. And Burgum, who I actually like a little bit.
So you're the
one. Well, I'm the one. Well, I made a lot of money because I made $19 from them. He did this thing. What is it that if you contribute $1 to him, he'd give you a $20 gift certificate?
I'm surprised that's not illegal in some states.
It's been done before, and that's how he qualified to get enough contributions to be in the debate. But he's the governor of North Dakota. I don't know. He sounds like a grown up at least. He's wants to get to zero carbon in North Dakota, which is ridiculous. I mean, not ridiculous. That doesn't mean he's not going to be exporting carbon. and he wants to sequester CO2 to pump up some of the hydrocarbons, some of the oil and gas. So I think he's kind of interesting. Let's see him debate. How is this latest indictment going to affect anything in this debate?
I don't think it's going to change things a whole lot. I just think that Trump has a trance over the Republican Party that's inexplicable, but it is there. And, I just think that 2/3 are going to be with him, or, 2/3 are going to end up being with him no matter what. And it's just, the party that Tim grew up in doesn't exist anymore. And not that Democrats haven't changed too, but when you see the share of non-college whites in the Republican Party in just 10 years going from 48 to 62%, wow. And the percentage of whites with a college degree going from 40 to 25, this is a different Republican Party than was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, obviously. I think strategically, thinking about how the candidates will react on the stage, I think we can just put Christie aside for a second because he'll be different than the other. I think there'll be two basically approaches to all the indictments. I don't know if the fourth one is any different from the third or the second as far as their strategy is concerned. One is I was at a cattle call in Cedar Rapids last weekend, and this was like a Republican political event from Earth 2. It's all the old establishment Chuck Grassley Iowa types, and they act as if Donald Trump doesn't even exist. Like Donald Trump's name doesn't come up. They all just talk about Joe Biden and how old he is and the Biden crime family and all this nonsense that they don't even Trump doesn't even get mentioned. It's very weird, actually. I asked a couple of the voters if they felt like it was as weird as me, and they concurred.
When you say it's a cattle call, it's a cattle call of the presidentials.
Yeah. So Burgum was there, Asa Hutchinson, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, most of the debate people. Nikki Haley was there. Christie wasn't there, and Trump wasn't there. So like that middle category of people, Tim Scott wasn't there. So five are the ones that'll be in the debate. Literally, they didn't even mention Donald Trump. Nobody talked about him. Ramaswamy mentioned him in a positive way. So it's like they're not. He's winning. He has over half the vote in the primary, and all the people losing to him by 50 points aren't even talking about him. So that's was kind of an absurd setting to be at. So I think that some of the candidates will do that, and then I think that DeSantis and maybe one or two others will try to make a practical electability point, not a point about the case, not a point on the merits, but just. The DOJ is bad and the deep state's after Trump, but, can we really nominate somebody that's going to be in a courtroom and, that can't make the case against Biden? And I think that we'll probably see DeSantis lean into that argument a little bit more than he has.
But you've got a bunch of campaigns, and their entire campaign strategy is praying every night that lightning will strike.
Well, literally, the DeSantis super PAC, I wrote this with Bulwark. DeSantis super PAC's ever said to me, point blank, that they are considering a delegate strategy of where they can get second. And who knows, what happens with Trump in the courtroom. And, we might end up with a convention fight.
Is there any chance that Trump gets a couple of convictions here and he's looking at jail time and the prosecutors say, don't run for president, you won't go to jail?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I think that there's some possibility. If you just look at the Jack Smith timeline, there's some possibility of this for sure. And this was what the DeSantis super PAC people were saying to me, that basically, again, this is kind of pathetic in a way that this is your strategy at this point. You're just sort of praying for Jack Smith to save you. But I do think that the other campaigns are considering the possibility that could happen. But I guess then my question is, wouldn't Trump control the delegates from jail? We're getting into uncharted territory here. So no. I think that he would take the deal, is what you're saying, and then not.
No, I'm thinking he might not take the deal, but he might take the deal.
Yeah.
So one, we have, what are the percentages that a deal like that would be offered? Pretty low, maybe.
Pretty low. Also, you'd be worried because Georgia all the prosecutors would have to
agree there.
Agree, yeah.
I don't think any of us are lawyers, but if you've got 18, 19 defendants in a case,
that one's going to take a while.
Yeah,
but we got two others that can probably get resolved before the convention's over, maybe. Certainly January 6th. I think that's first up. That would be my guess. And then the second up would be Mar-a-Lago, the documents. And at a certain point, especially I don't know, January 6th might be over enough that he's looking at real jail time. Of course, he'd be appealing. I don't know. But that's a strategy I'm kind of hoping for. I think.
You and the DeSantis super PAC are aligned on that one, Al. You guys have the same stuff. But
I'm not sure DeSantis gets it there, because let's talk about DeSantis. This guy is the worst candidate I've ever seen.
I just wonder who told Ron DeSantis that he had a personality for politics.
He's governor of Florida.
Well,
and he won by a lot. And
first time, not by much, but
and all that was based on he put his son in a Trump T-shirt, right?
Yeah. But
in great.
Yeah, this guy just does not seem to have the personal skills that a candidate at that level needs.
He has some political instincts, like, for example, go after the largest employer in your state.
over a lesbian kiss.
That's over. Oh, is that in a Disney movie?
The Lightyear movie. Yeah, you don't want two women doing a light peck on the lips in a movie.
But I think it wasn't over that. They actually took issue with his "Don't Say Gay" policy when it was just for third grade or something.
Yeah,
and then he expanded it through high school. It's pretty amazing. But you know how many people visit Disney World a year? It's like 45 million. That's an economic driver. And to go after Disney, I knew that when I was a senator. Don't go after the largest employer in your state. And they made medical devices. But anyway. So who in this debate is going for vice president?
Well, all of them. I think Tim Scott for sure. His advisor sent a tweet earlier that was basically trying to push back on this notion, saying you only get in the race to win. But it's like, right. Okay, well, you're losing by 40 and you haven't criticized the person beating you yet. So I don't like it. Doesn't show, don't tell. But
I think Trump's more likely to pick somebody that's not in this field. I think he'd probably look at Tim Scott and think, I had one Eagle Scout, type as a vice president once.
An evangelical.
I not do that again. So, like Elisa Stefanik or someone, I suspect it'll be someone like that.
Wouldn't it be weird if he just decided to pick Pence again and Pence took it?
Yeah, it would. The thing about just going back to DeSantis really quick is the best thing he has going for him is that there really isn't another good option. Like going back to Charlie's point about the nature of how the party's changed. Like Tim Scott, who's obviously more talented as a politician than DeSantis, just kind of looks and smells like a Bush era Republican. He just the voters just do not buy that he's MAGA. And so that's going to put a ceiling on his support, somewhere around 25%. He's just not going to pull from the MAGA part of the party.
He's an evangelical.
Nice. But he's not he's not doing we shouldn't give money to Ukraine or nobody really believes that he is, going to put the moat on the border with the alligators in it or send the military to the border. He's not doing the culture war stuff. He doesn't do the anti-woke stuff like DeSantis. There's a majority of the party wants that. So if they move off of Trump, they're not going to go to Tim Scott. I mean, there's also.
Now, you did not overlap with Scott in the Senate, did you?
Yeah, of course he did.
Okay. I was trying to remember when he was first elected because he, hasn't had a race. But isn't he supposed to be one of the most best liked members, both sides of the aisle, just as a nice guy?
He's kind of a nice guy. He has his narrative, single mom, I guess, and got this franchise. What was it, Chick-fil-A? Very much about faith. But boy, is he a doctrinaire Republican, but of the old school. Yeah. So, for example, he was given the job of being the floor leader for the tax cut, for Trump's tax cut. And I remember I went up to him on the floor and I said, Tim, this is going to increase the deficit by $1.9 trillion. And the Republicans they're always deficit hawks, at least when there's a Democratic president, right? And he says, no, it won't. And I said, yes, it will. And I said, your own CBO scored it that way. That's the Congressional Budget Office for, that was picked by the Republican Party. Okay, your own CBO said. He said, well, it's a good thing then, because they'll have less money to spend. The government will have less money to spend. And I said, well, the government creates jobs. And he said, no, it doesn't. And I said, no, the government creates jobs. He goes, no, the government has never created a job. And I said, well, you and I have government jobs. He said, that doesn't count, of course. And then I said, but okay, how about like the interstate highway system? How about that? that created jobs. How about the internet? How about the space program? How about the Transcontinental Railroad? How about the Erie Canal? And then he said, well, private sector would have done it more efficiently. I said, the space program. And he goes, yes. And he goes, okay. So like we would have had a man on the moon by the 1920s then? They would have been dancing the Charleston up there. Is that what are you talking about? And he really, that's the kind of Republican he is, which is a crazy thing. That's the put him in the bathtub and drown him, right? It's a Grover Norquist kind of Republican. So that to me is as scary as anything.
The merits of that aside, the point that I was making is like the Republicans now don't want that. Like they're not interested in Grover Norquist Republicanism. And you go to a MAGA event and you ask
they don't like
what
rich
issues
people.
that they care about. No, they don't care about tax
Meritocracy.
cuts or like they don't care about that. They like the culture war stuff. That's why DeSantis was doing well back in December. They liked the shipping the migrants to Martha's Vineyard. They liked the Don't Say Gay bill. Like that's what was working for DeSantis originally. And Tim Scott just doesn't have that.
You're saying no to anybody on the who's running now as a Veep. Is that what you're saying, Charlie?
Yeah. I think he'll get some relatively no-name person that will be a potted plant and not distract. But I don't think it's going to be anybody from this field. But
But Pence was a genius choice last time because he was an evangelical. And then that combined with pledging to pick only Supreme Court justices approved by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation meant we'd get Dobbs.
I mean, by that point, Trump obviously had everything wrapped up, but it did make the social conservatives, evangelical conservatives, feel a little better about things by putting some guy on, by putting an Eagle Scout like Pence on. I think they found that reassuring, even though they were really, already in the tank.
I'm not sure they were already in the tank for Trump.
I think that there's so Trump benefited from in 2016, there were the third party candidates that got a lot greater share, Gary Johnson and Evan McMullen than in 2020. And I do think there were like the softer, even religious folks. Trump did very poorly actually in the primary with like multi-time a week religious Republicans, like people who went to church not just on Sunday, but also go to church during the week. A lot of those folks were most skeptical of Trump. Like Trump did the best with the evangelicals who are, cultural evangelicals, if you will. And so I do think that deal helped him on the margins with some folks that might have thrown their vote away or not voted or something.
And the margins was where the election was won. I disagree with you. I think that was a bigger deal. I thought it was a genius move. And I understand it was his, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was a bad decision at all. I just don't know. I mean, I just think
terrible
it made
decision for the country.
Might normally have a few reservations about Trump feel better about things.
Let's go to the dynamics of the debate. So you've got DeSantis, Ramaswamy, probably Pence, Scott not yet in. Did you say he's in? He's again. Okay. Nikki Haley, Christie, and Burgum. Okay. Are they going to be mixing it up? Are they going to be attacking each other?
Does it matter? I don't think Donald Trump's going to show up. And if he doesn't show up, I don't think a lot of viewers are going to show up. So I don't know that this debate is going to mean anything if Trump's not there.
Well, we're doing a podcast on it, so we have to say it means something. That's how show business works.
Yeah, I would say it could mean that, look, DeSantis, I think, is at real risk of completely bottoming out, and he's pretty close to it already, down in the low teens. And I think that if the interest here is this, what if something happens to Trump, whether it be Jack Smith, whether it be that one well done cheeseburger that some of us are praying for, or whatever, like that, is there another person waiting in the wings?
Wait, the one well done cheeseburger that
the artery clogging one,
right? Okay.
And so, like, the question is, if something happens, like, or can DeSantis be there, in a position to take advantage? And I think that he's got to demonstrate, if he's capable of this, that he is the alpha and the other choice among this kind of kids' table of candidates. And I think that he's at very real risk to go below Vivek Ramaswamy in Iowa, go below Tim Scott in South Carolina, and go below Chris Christie in New Hampshire. And if he has a bad debate and comes out of this where we're in that situation where he's polling third, fourth in these states, he might be in a Scott Walker situation where he gets out of the race. So I think that the debate is very meaningful for Ron DeSantis. Whether it's that meaningful in the long run about Trump and whether Trump is the nominee, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the whole. I mean, I if there's not some kind of an adverse health event, my assumption is Trump is going to be the nominee, and that none of these guys have the chops to take him out. And particularly if you're not going to take him on, in which only Christie is really doing. But just a couple hours ago, the new NPR PBS Marist poll came out, and they asked a two-way between Trump and DeSantis, and Trump led 67-29. Among Republicans and Republican-leaning incumbents, 67-29. Among just Republicans, 65-30. And among the Republican-leaning independents, 72-24.
So Trump is stronger even with independents.
Yeah, I think people don't realize, like, DeSantis was neck and neck with Trump in these head-to-head polls in Christmas. I think there's a lot of folks, particularly on the left or whatever, that think, oh, Trump had a total stranglehold on this, and this has all been for show, and it doesn't really matter. That isn't really true. Like,
no, after the midterm
campaign has been a disaster. Yeah, right after the midterm, DeSantis and Trump were head-to-head. This is a disastrous turn to be down 40 just 6 months later.
I kind of wonder, though, whether the period right after the midterms, whether it was kind of an artificially weird period, because, Trump quite appropriately took a lot of blame for Republicans underperforming the midterm. And so that sort of depressed his support for a bit. DeSantis wins re-election by 19 points. That kind of pumped him up. But after a little while and some exposure, it kind of, the things just reverted to the mean.
But the exposure was DeSantis.
Yeah, and it was just, and the closeness of it may have been overstated by what was going on immediately after the election. And then now it's obviously wider than it was before the election. So I just don't see Trump being stopped unless there's a medical event. I mean, for the Republican nomination.
Well, I think there may be a legal event. In other words, he may be looking at jail time. Seriously, I actually hope the trial will be televised, the January 6th one, but it won't be, right? There's no chance of that.
Not federal, but
the judicial conference won't, but the one in Georgia will be. And is there any chance that people will watch this? And no, what am I saying? We saw the January 6th committee hearings, and that didn't change any Republicans, did it?
I just think that the wheels of justice move very, very slow. And when someone has, the resources that Trump has to slow things down, in one case, 18 or so defendants.
Yeah, that seems like a slow one.
My breath that you're going to have a full-blown trial before the election.
Oh, yeah. I think you will in the January 6th one, don't you, Tim?
I think Jack Smith's going to try his damnedest to make sure it happens. I try not to get in the prediction business about things that are outside of my wheelhouse, but and he's trying to schedule a date for January for a reason. I think he's very focused on making that happen, and it seems like, based on what legal experts are saying, that a lot of the choices that he made about the nature of the indictments was because he wants to make sure that the trial happens before.
And he's the only defendant.
Yeah, right.
And the judge seems to be very keen to get this going, too. And she says that if he violates her orders, she's not going to jail him, but she said she might move the date of the trial up. So I think she's keen to do it, and I don't know how long a trial this really is.
I do agree with that. But here's what I think. Even in that optimistic scenario, Al, where there is a trial, where something happens, where he decides that he wants to, he cuts a deal, anything, whatever fantasy scenario you want to put forward. The Republican voter, going back to Charlie's original point, wants the MAGA stuff. Like, they're going to want somebody that's like Trump. If Vivek Ramaswamy, who's kind of doing this MAGA cosplay, it was a 40-something-year-old evangelical rather than 38-year-old Hindu, like, I think he would be the clear person that they would go to, and that's what DeSantis had going for him early. So, if Trump drops, that is the voter that matters, as like this MAGA voter that really likes Trump. And so I think that's why a lot of these other candidates are kind of irrelevant.
And Haley has no chance of being the Veep.
She gave this speech at that cattle call I was talking about.
Yep.
It could have been at an AEI conference. It was appealing to me a little bit. I mean, she was talking about Ukraine and how important
the
it is
American
to defend
Enterprise
Ukraine.
Institute, which is it's the American Enterprise
It's a conservative.
Institute.
It's like an old line conservative
think tank.
Think tank, yeah. But it was about her criticism of Biden is that he wasn't doing enough to help in Ukraine, which is in the bulwark wheelhouse here. But in that room, I mean, it was like you'd hear a pin drop. She was lucky that there weren't tomatoes being thrown at her. And so there's just no appetite among the Republican base for somebody like Haley right now. And that's why she's at 2 or 3%.
So do these people make it to Iowa?
I think you could probably count on one hand the number of candidates that are going to still be in this race on New Year's Eve. I mean, someone will be trying to hang on just in case lightning strikes. But, at some point, most presidential campaigns that fold, they fold because they run out of money, that people stop giving. And I don't know how a lot of these folks are going to keep going particularly after a couple of debates, or whether they're either not being in a couple of debates or doing so badly, or with the thresholds going up where it makes harder and harder to get on the debate stage. I think this field's going to be much less than half of the size it is now.
Yeah, Pence could barely get on this debate stage.
Has Pence helped himself by becoming a little angry?
He's helped himself with me, which I don't think is a great sign since I left the party.
I mean, have we seen any uptick in his polling?
No.
He may sleep better at night, but I don't think it doesn't affect his chances any at all.
In that New York Times poll that they did, Nate Cohn and those guys were doing, this was my favorite stuff, New York Times poll, is that Pence's favorability rating, which is, people that say they have a favorable versus unfavorable rating of him, is like -1 or even, or it was 44-43, one way or the other. Mm-hmm. RFK Jr. was like 52-13. I'll give or take a couple. I'm doing this from memory. But so it's like because of the anti-vax stuff, RFK Jr., the lifelong Democrat, is massively more popular among Republican primary voters than the most recent vice president, just because of his action on January 6th.
Well, here's the thing. If you do a Venn diagram, right, and you do people who love Trump, none of them are going to like Pence because he didn't do what he needed to do to become president. And then people who hate Trump, they're not going to like Pence because Pence was this toady for 4 years. So you kind of do wonder who wants Pence. But what if he just shows some balls during the trial? Like says, this motherfucker almost had me killed. Something like that.
Might be able to sell more books.
I don't know. I mean, he said, I'm an evangelical, but this guy almost, I don't know. I don't hold out hope for Pence because of my Venn diagram thing, which is I don't see any Republican liking him because either if they love Trump, they hate Pence. If they hate Trump, they hate Pence. So
this Marist poll that came out this morning, 44% of Republicans say Trump did nothing wrong. 43 unethical but not illegal, and only 9 something illegal.
And what percentage of Trump or of Republican voters who say, or voters who say they'll vote in the Republican primary, think that Trump won the election? I think it's something like 75%.
It's around 2/3, isn't it,
Yeah,
Tim?
2/3 is, it's different from poll to poll, but yeah, 2/3 is a good rule of thumb for that. Yeah.
And is this all Fox? I mean, Tim, you must be sort of thought a lot about this, about your party and why it went where it went. Is it Fox? Is it social media?
Yeah, and the media is part of this, but it's it is bottom up, right? And I do think that there's a meaningful difference, right? If you go back to the 90s or whatever, where you had Rush and there were problems with that, obviously. But the people that listened to Rush also watched Tom Brokaw at night, So the information that they were getting was a little bit tempered with, some checks to reality.
Well, I wrote a book called Rush Limbaugh's a Big Fat Idiot and Other Observations.
Yeah, I know, right, exactly. So
and then,
that was a good reference point.
Then I wrote Lies and Lying Liars, who tell them a fair and balanced look at the right, which was...
all still available on Amazon.
Thank you. And that was about Fox, right? That was about cable TV. So you're right. Rush was on at a point where there were 3 network news shows at night, but no cable.
Yeah, and so people got different stuff. And so just really quick, Charlie, let's go. But now the problem is the tiger is out of the cage here, and you can't control it. And so Fox now is only one part of the problem, right? And you have all of these other outlets that have sprung up that are even crazier than Fox and even more MAGA and even more willing to spread lies that people are choosing. And so if you're an average Republican primary voter and you ask them where you're getting your news, it's it might be Steve Bannon's podcast or Candace Owens, and maybe it's Newsmax, and maybe they tune into Fox for the shows they like, but they don't like Steve Doocy anymore because he's not nice enough to Trump. So, but they aren't saying I have a mix of news. I'm reading the local paper and I'm watching Lester Holt. That's not it. They're completely in a, hermetically sealed information bubble. And so I think that Fox is part of that now, but it's going beyond Fox.
Well, Charlie, you've been polling the country for decades. What are you seeing in that regard?
I agree with everything Tim said about the different media ecosystem that conservatives and Republicans have. But I would argue, you go back 60, 70 years, and a lot of people were what I would call ancestral partisans. I mean, they were Democrats or they were Republicans because their parents and grandparents had been. And you had 2 broad-based parties, ideologically diverse parties. And sort of conservatives kept Democrats from going off into a ditch on the left, and liberals kept Republicans from going off into a ditch on the right. There were plenty of moderates in both sides. But starting in the 80s and 90s, you started seeing this ideological sorting take place and sort of an exodus of liberals out of the Republican Party and conservatives out of the Democratic Party. And that, the moderating influences in each party basically went away. It's more dramatic, certainly on the Republican side. But, I don't think there's any doubt the Democratic Party is more liberal now than it was under Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or even Barack Obama. The 2 parties have become more monolithic, but with the Republican side, it's been demographic, it's been geographic.
Well, geographic is the South. I mean,
South and small town rural.
And rural. You have to understand that the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, the South used to be Democratic, and there was rural electrification. There was a lot of stuff where the Democratic Party stuck together on things. And there were Northeast liberals, right? And those Northeast liberals were like Jacob Javits, and they started to disappear and became just liberals, liberal Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, when I came to Washington as a freshman in college and started working on the Hill part time in January of '73, you had 2 Republican senators from New York, you had 2 Republican senators from Maryland, from Vermont, from Oregon.
When I came to the Senate, we had 2 Democratic senators from North Dakota.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there were a lot of things, and part of it was media culture. Part of it was changing geography of, Republican Party, the center of gravity, moving away from the coast and moving out from the cities, and Democrats becoming more urbanized. So I think it's a lot of things have come together, but the sort of takeover of non-college whites in the Republican Party was, a big piece of it. And that, you had Republicans running for president for years and years, and they would talk a real conservative game. But when they got in, they governed right of center, but they didn't deliver nearly as conservative as they had promised. And I think the hardcore conservatives just got a belly full, and that was one of many things that in 2016 triggered a revolution where the establishment Republican Party was basically thrown out.
And this is why Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, to bring back to the debate, don't matter. I just, in the end, just have this ceiling of people, that they can reach. And I think that, and that is just to kind of add on to what Joey's been saying, just about this new batch, this current makeup of the primary, right, is that you've now lost the people that were, whatever, stereotypically in the suburbs, like, socially moderate, fiscally conservative types, like they're not voting on Republican primaries anymore. They were voting for Pete in the Democratic primary for the most part. And you've brought in these people that their main motivating issue is the culture war stuff and the nationalist element, the anti-immigrant, isolationist and the culture war elements. And so all of those new people that have come into the party, anyone from the pre-Trump era is anathema to them. Like if you smell at all like you're somebody from the Grover Norquist era, it's like, oh no, you're an establishment shill. I don't want you. And so that's when you look at this field, it's hard to see who else. Vivek is really the only other one who kind of naturally comes from the post-Trump era that can appeal to those folks, but he has his own, kind of demographic issues.
Have you heard him speak?
So I went to see DeSantis and him back to back in Iowa. And I mean, he is just 100,000 times better than DeSantis. I mean, it's just, Tom Brady versus like a peewee football quarterback, just as far as the presentation separation. Now, obviously that's presentation isn't everything, but he's very good. Obviously there's probably a phony element to this, and he goes down some like very weird MAGA elements and, rabbit holes. But, I thought he was more like, to use the Democratic analogy, not to compare on the merits, but just on presentation style, I expected him to be more like Andrew Yang, kind of quirky, but he really was more in the vein of Pete. Like he comes off as somebody who's very smart, very educated. People ask questions. He gives detailed answers that offer MAGA red meat. And at the end, he has the crowds on their feet in a way that DeSantis didn't. Again, though, at the event I went to in Iowa, the third question was, talk to us about how you're Hindu. And he gives like a very tortured answer about Judeo-Christian values. And he like reminds people that, he's not the type of Hindu that believes in many polytheism. And it's like, oh God, so you can see like some of the limits that he has, certainly with the evangelical elements of the party. So anyway, once you're explaining all that, I think there's a problem. But just that, like he is doing that. We're going to send military to the border. We're not going to give another cent to Ukraine. We need to, make sure our family values are back in the schools.
And that's where Republicans are. So
and that's where they are.
They do not believe that Russia is a threat.
I mean, again, there's some vestigial Republicans in the party, maybe a quarter. I don't know, Charlie, you look at the data closer to me, but just ballparking, I'd say maybe a quarter of the party. Yeah, that are still, want us to be strong in Ukraine, care about military alliance. There's a GOP voters for Ukraine, ad that just came out by some of my friends are doing this. You're trying to push the party in the right direction on this, but and it's the voices of real voters. And you notice demographically, like there's some older voters that are of the Cold War era that like remember that why the NATO alliance is important, and there's still a quarter of the party there, which is not insignificant. But the majority of the party is now completely accepted the isolationist line.
Well, that's why, and then I want to ask you this of Charlie, of course. Do Democrats take the House back? And it's way, way, way ahead of time, but that seems pretty important.
We came out of 2020 with the House, basically 5-6 seats apart. Then we came out of 2022, 5-6 seats apart. Frankly, I don't think, I think it's just going to stay in that range where nobody's going to have a majority of more than, say, 10 seats, no matter what. And, when you have an evenly divided country, elections are going to reflect that. And the only reason the Senate may not be as close as it is now is that Democrats just have a terrible map, defending 7 seats in states that Trump carried at least once. And,
don't Republicans in the Senate, aren't they more inclined to support the war?
Oh, yeah.
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 So that's about the churn of the members, right? And it's 6-year terms. Like it's going to take a while for, the old line Republicans to get, all primaried out. And some of them
and
are
having broader constituents, having a broader constituency, a whole state rather than, a packed up, extremely partisan congressional district.
Yeah, that's where gerrymandering has really kind of hurt everything.
Population just patterns. People, they want to go where they're comfortable and they want to leave where they're uncomfortable. And they're voting with their feet. And now, recently just leaving states for political reasons. It used to be the only reason you might have an economic concern or whatever about moving is because you want to go maybe to a state that had no state income tax or something like that. But now the culture has gotten into it so that people are moving in some ways because they want to find people like themselves. They don't like who they're around.
None of this is good, is it?
Yeah. Well, here's something. As long as we're going to get depressed, in the new Marist NPR PBS poll came out this morning, they asked people, when thinking about the issues that divide this country, do you think, one option, there is a serious threat to the future of our democracy, or there is not a serious threat to the future of our democracy? 87% of Democrats said there's a threat to democracy. 12 did not. Okay. 87-12. Among Republicans, 88 yes, 10 no. It's just that each defined the other as a serious threat. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, I guess I'd say the only positive of this as the former squishy Republican representative on the podcast, like I was pretty encouraged in the midterms about how there is maybe not as many as we'd hoped, but a majority support, or maybe a better put, a majority opposition to the anti-democratic right. And if you look at a place like Arizona, and really it was my people, it was the McCain flake voters that switched, right? Like it was not really a turnout story, in the midterms. It was people that used to vote Republican in a red state that were like, no, like Carrie Lake, this woman is a lunatic. Blake Masters is creepy. This stuff is too far, and we're going to switch. And so I think that is the encouraging part about.
I also think that you're seeing in places like Wisconsin and in Michigan and Pennsylvania, you're seeing them go back a little bit to more moderate and democratic stances.
To me, you had about 24 races, maybe 4 Senate, 4 governor, 4 Secretary of State, 4 AG, 8 House races, where Republicans just jumped the shark. They just nominated people that were just, too far.
And a lot of those are Trump supported.
Mattered, and Republicans lost them. But when you look at the national vote, it was more in line with what you'd expect from a midterm election, but kind of like with Hillary Clinton in 2016, it's not how many votes you get, it's where do you get them, and where it really mattered, Republicans didn't get them in those 24 MAGA races. But nationally speaking, they won the national popular vote by a couple of points.
Oy. Okay, I think that should be the last word, don't you?
Yeah, I'm usually the dark one, so I'm happy to let Charlie end on that.
I was kind of optimistic going in, but not now. Thanks, guys. Wow.
Thanks, Al.
Okay, Charlie, it's the last time you're on. No.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.